Editing is perhaps my favorite part of the production process. It never gets tedious like shooting random pan and tilt shots in B-roll can, and it doesn't strain my voice like presentation can. In today's video, since it's been requested so much, I thought we'd take a look behind the scenes, and I'd just show you guys how I edit a YouTube video from start to finish. Okay, so first and foremost, I am a Premiere editor. I do sometimes use Final Cut, but most of the time I'm on Premiere. So on a typical editing session, this is what I'm looking at. I usually put my project on the top left, and that was actually one of my favorite things about Final Cut. I really like having my source clips on a big window, because when you get to organize it, you can just click and it stays in the same place. You're still in the source window. Set your in and out points there. So the first thing I'll always do whenever I'm editing a video is I'll drag my first and main clip into the timeline to create a new sequence. Now, before I do any editing at all, I always head up to the sequence settings and change my resolution. Now, this is because all of my videos are in 3840 by 1920, which is 2:1 or 18:9. And the reason I do this is because most people watch YouTube on their phones, and nowadays most phones have that 18:9 resolution. So why not optimize it? I then go and click custom. I change it to QuickTime and ProRes 422. I set the width and the height on the previews. Press OK again, and it automatically conforms it. That's something that I really love about Premiere. You actually have to manually crop it in Final Cut. It's just a little bit easier, and that time saving goes a long way. Next, we start cutting the A-roll. I usually just cut the A-roll on its own. I don't bother putting music tracks in. I don't start color grading. And the way I personally like to cut it is I find the first clip and then I ripple trim pressing Q. After this, I'll simply go through ripple trimming all the way, adding these constant powers. If you use the ripple trim, which I strongly recommend you do, it often cuts off one more frame than you need. And because of this, you'll get a little pop sound on your cut. Constant power is almost like an audio crossfade, and this just gets rid of that. It's super easy to do. It takes a second. All you have to do is click Command Shift D, drag it down to one frame, and then done. Something else I like to do when I'm editing my talking head section is to do L cuts. Now, this is where I'll wait till I finish talking, cut, then go to the next section where I start talking, drag it down, and drag this video clip underneath, so the next one starts before the last one's finished. This is often used in films. It's a super common technique when editing dialogue, and it just makes your videos look that much more professional. Next, I like to add my first color grade because it just makes the footage look that much more interesting. Color grading is definitely one of my favorite parts about editing. Now, if I've done lots of these L cuts, then generally I will go and I will open up an adjustment layer, because anything underneath this adjustment layer will be affected by the effects on it, so we can just stick a general grade on and we don't have to bother copy and pasting onto a bunch of different clips. Now, an important thing about my workflow is that I shoot all of my clips in Rec 709. I generally shoot in 8-bit for these YouTube videos, and you really shouldn't be shooting any log apart from that new Canon log on the EOS R. In 8-bit, it's just not enough information to handle that crazy gamut. So in general, whenever I'm color grading, I like to start with a LUT, and the first one I like to use is the Cinema LUT from Matti Haapoja. Now, I just click that on, and immediately it looks terrible. Obviously, it's a super strong LUT. We just want to dial that back until it looks normal, which is around the 38 to 40%. Now, because of the way I look this, it looks a little bit too harsh for my taste. I generally prefer a smoother look. So we're gonna go back into my LUTs and use my second favorite LUT, which is the M31. Now, this has a much smoother skin tone roll off. In general, the oranges are a lot more saturated with this LUT, so I like to dial it down to around 70%. With this, I will also bring up the shadows. I will bring down the highlights a little, and then we're gonna add a little bit of contrast. And there we go. That's a typical color grade for me. Something to make sure of when you're shooting is that your white balance is 100% accurate. I know that this light is 5400 Kelvin, so I have that set on this camera. I also always like to get my exposure right, and that way I don't have to do all that much work in post. I can just get down to the creative stuff. Next, we move on to B-roll. Now, in my B-roll, I follow 3 key elements: shooting a lot of handheld, shooting half speed, and follow the tight, medium, wide rule. Okay, so first of all, why half speed? Well, I like to have a smooth, dreamlike look to my B-roll, and I really think 60 FPS just looks so good when it's slowed down. Why not 120p though? I mean, my camera does it. This is purely because for the movements that I want in my videos, 120p is just a little bit too slow, especially when it comes to things like phones where you have things moving on the screen. In 120p, it just looks like whereas if I shoot in 60 FPS, the screen usually still looks smooth. Okay, so how do I conform my 60 FPS shots to 24 FPS, which is what all my videos are in? I right click, go to modify, interpret footage, and here it gives us two options: use frame rate from file or assume this frame rate. Now, where it says assume this frame rate, we're gonna write 23.976, which is the NTS standard for 24 FPS. Once we click OK, this clip will have been slowed down, and as we can see, we set our in and out points. It's slower. Now, while we can slow this clip down in the timeline, there is one key reason as to why I don't do this. If I drag this clip on which has already been slowed down, when I drag this clip on that's already been slowed down, I have the option to use Warp Stabiliser. Warp Stabiliser is a great tool for just getting rid of those micro jitters which come from handheld footage. We're going to stick that on and have a look at the difference that it makes. Okay, it's done stabilizing. Let's take a look at how it worked. And there we go. Nice. Okay, now let me show you what happens when we try to slow a clip down in the timeline. We're gonna go to this clip, we're gonna right click, speed and duration, then we're gonna go speed 40% because as I said, this is in 60 FPS, and we're also gonna reverse the clip. So now, while it looks good there, if we want to add some Warp Stabiliser, we're going to get this notification. Warp Stabiliser and speed can't be used on the same clip. To overcome this, because there is a workaround, you can right click, click nest, and then make a new nested sequence, which will sort of create a sequence within a sequence. It's kind of complicated, but now we can drag the Warp Stabiliser onto our nested sequence and it works fine. Now, sometimes I do have to do this because I often do have to reverse my clips, but when I can, it's generally better to interpret the footage. Next, we're going to be looking at how I color grade my B-roll. Now, this is generally different to the way I color grade my talking head section. My talking head section is generally just one look. It stays consistent throughout. But with my B-roll, it's different environments for the different clips. So this one's outside. There's inside shots with studio lighting like this one. There's inside shots with natural lighting like this one. It's just a different look altogether. These ones are outside though, so we're gonna grade them as such. Now, I like to grade using Lumetri. I don't use any third-party tools. I just like the way Lumetri renders the colors. It's super clean. This is one of the reasons why I edit in Premiere. It's just a really nice color grading experience. Now, for this one, we actually are gonna use the Cinema LUT because this one works really nicely outside, and if we turn it down to about 50%, we get a really nice look. It has that sort of green tint like a lot of cinema cameras have, but it keeps the whites white, and overall it looks really good. Now this next one, I would do the same. So we're gonna copy, and we are gonna paste attributes. We're gonna take Warp Stabiliser off because we've already done that. Paste the Lumetri color, and we have our second color grade. Now we're gonna grade a very neutral inside shot. This is just a pan of the camera on the iPhone 10. And this time we're gonna use that M31 LUT again because it looks really nice inside. It looks really good with studio lighting, especially when there's a lot of white in the frame. There's no tint, and overall it's just a really good looking LUT. And there we go. Even at full power, this LUT doesn't look overpowering. I am gonna turn it down a little bit though. It's just a little bit too stylized for my taste. We'll put it to 88. And I think that looks great. Now we have this inside shot. Now, because this has got a lot of wood in the frame, we are going to add a different LUT. Now, because this has got a lot of wood in the frame, we're gonna add one of my favorite LUTs, which is the X9400. And this is actually a free LUT. I'll leave the link where you can get this in the description. We're gonna turn that down, and then we're gonna add a second Lumetri layer. So we're gonna take this too. We're gonna copy and paste from this LUT here because we're also gonna be using the M31 LUT. And this combination of LUTs seriously looks amazing. Got some nice hints of purple in there. The wood looks incredible. And overall, I really like this LUT. This is one of the ones I also use for my low light as well. In low light, I might mess around with the faded film. I might add a little bit. But in general, those are the three main color grading techniques I use to grade my B-roll. Next, what do we need? We need some titles. And I'm gonna be honest, with my turnaround, I like to use templates. I found this really cool one about a week ago, and I really like him for breaking down my videos. Now, we're just gonna add cameras here, and there we go. How good does that look? Another tip I have for you is keep your text small. Big text doesn't look cinematic. If you're going for the cinematic look, keep your text small. Seriously, if you have a project on the go right now, make a piece of text smaller and see how much more cinematic it looks. Next, we're talking audio. So nowadays, I get all of my music from Epidemic Sound. We're gonna use Oi by Bermuda. By the way, if you don't already know what that one is, it's... And to mix this in, as I've said in many other videos, I like to normalize it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn up the volume, and then we play it out with the rest of the voiceover. That's usually set in camera. This, by the way, was the first day on that. Okay, in this video, it ended up being -20 to the point where it sounded normalized. That's pretty much all I do. Audio is very simple. Ever since I started using studio monitors as opposed to headphones, mixing audio has become very easy. You just turn it up a bit, and now if I turn it back down to a watchable level, You can check that out up there. I see. It sounds great. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna export the video. I do this stock in Premiere. I don't like to use Adobe Media Encoder. We hit File, Export Media, and I use some very specific settings. So yeah, resolution we keep the same, use maximum render quality. I use Harbor encoding to encode my videos. The time saving is just ridiculous. And then I set my bitrate, which is super important, to 100. This is another feature of Premiere that you don't get in Final Cut. You don't get exact control over your bitrate. I always find that I get less color artifacting in my Premiere exports versus my Final Cut exports, and this is because of the bitrate. If you want to easily increase your quality, just up the bitrate, the difference will be night and day. Once we're done with that, I hit export, and we're done. That's how I edit a video. And that's pretty much all I do nowadays. Now, I know I used to do lots of flashy transitions and zooms and just, but in recent months, I've moved away from stuff like that for something a bit more tasteful. These flashy transitions like luma fades and zooms will eventually go out of date. It's no question about it. I know I still do the speed ramps and the slow motion, and they're all quite popular right now. So despite the fact that all of these elements are pre-existing, I'm not the first person to do ripple trims. I'm not the first person to use the M31. I'm certainly not the first person to do slow motion. It's all of these different elements put together that make up my style. Now, of course, a lot of this happens on the shooting side of things, such as the slow motion and the handheld, but it's the editing that really brings it all together. Fun fact, I often find my videos really boring until I add some music. Or maybe a piece of B-roll just look a little bit bland, I'll add a color grade, and it becomes one of my favorite shots. And that's why I love editing more than anything else. I love seeing the video come together, and I always love finding new, fun, creative ways to talk to you guys about tech. By the way, let me know if you want to see a shooting tutorial, so how I shoot an iPhone video or any other video. If you want to see that, feel free to leave a comment, but for now, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video. If you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I'll see you guys in the next one.